You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into another important discussion now. South Africa has reiterated its call for the International Court of Justice to order Israel to stop its escalated attack on Palestinians. Thousands of people died since the military offensive started in Gaza in October last year. This was in response to a surprise attack on southern Israel by Hamas fighters. Now, Pretoria is accusing Tel Aviv of violating its obligations under the Genocide Convention and is calling on the World Court to implement additional provisional measures. South Africa's ambassador to the Netherlands, Vusi Madonsela, says the gravity of the attacks requires urgent intervention. Let's take a listen.
Sadly, South Africa is yet again compelled to return to this court in recognition of its obligation under the Genocide Convention due to the continuing annihilation of the Palestinian people, with over 35,000 now killed and most of Gaza reduced to rubble. Despite the short notice of this oral hearing, South Africa has traveled here today to do what it can to urgently stop the ongoing genocide. The gravity of the attacks requiring urgent and speedy proceedings to preserve the rights of the Palestinian people, a commitment which South Africa takes seriously. Israel is escalating its attacks on Palestinians in Gaza, and in so doing is willfully breaching the binding orders of this court. Israel similarly breaches the binding resolutions of the United Nations Security Council, erroneously believing from the lack of countermeasures by the international community that it is exempt from having to respect international law.
Let's get some analysis now on South Africa's submissions today at the ICJ, and we are joined by Mapungubwe Institute senior researcher Jeenah and the University of Pretoria's Professor Thomashausen. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Can I begin with you, Professor Thomashausen? South Africa going back to the ICJ, and do you think that they will be listened to by the court, by the ICJ, on their latest request?
Well, good evening. It's Unisa, not University of Pretoria, although I would also love to have been there.
Apologies about that.
The ICJ, in my view, is not the right forum. Those who aren't really experts in international law, and unfortunately nobody in the South African team is, they don't seem to understand the system that the United Nations have created after World War II. The ICJ is there to adjudicate serious disputes of probable possible rights between states, but not to stop a war which is violently in progress. For that, the United Nations has Chapter 7. The United Nations Security Council must then adopt peacekeeping missions, and it started by doing so in the Korean conflict, the war between North and South Korea. And it established the United Nations Command, UNC, and it enlisted troops, active soldiers from 22 nations, that established a corridor between the two warring parties. And it is really surprising that South Africa, with its enormous judicial activism in this case, hasn't, for instance, come up with the idea that the 2 battalions which are stationed of the SANDF, which are stationed in North Mozambique and were ordered to come back now, that they haven't been redeployed or haven't been deployed already to be tendered as one of the components of a peacekeeping force under the United Nations command. That would have saved lives. In my opinion, the judicial activism in front of the ICJ hasn't saved a single life and will not save a single life.
Mr. Jeenah, let's come to you. And do you want to respond to that? Because Professor Thomashausen is clear that the ICJ is not the right forum. It cannot stop the war. Why does South Africa keep going back there, though?
He might be clear, but he's being disingenuous here. The purpose of the ICJ is to mediate conflicts between states and to adjudicate over treaties and conventions such as the Genocide Convention. That's the purpose for which it is there. Now, by saying that they should rather go to the UN Security Council, he knows very well that at the UN Security Council, Israel has a complete veto through the United States. And so nothing will happen at the Security Council that is critical of Israel. The UN Security Council is not going to use Chapter 7 against Israel because of the US veto. And so nothing will happen. Besides, the point is that it doesn't say, going to the ICJ, he says, will not save lives. Yes, that's correct. Why does it not save lives? Because Israel acts with complete impunity. Israel has accused the ICJ itself of being soft on terrorism. It has called the United Nations Secretary General a terrorist. The ambassador of Israel in the UN took the UN Charter and ripped it in front of all the delegates there. They have absolutely no respect for international law, no respect for any multilateral organizations, no respect for the World Court. So yes, it seems clear that going there will not stop Israel's genocide, but neither will it stop Israel's genocide by going to the UN Security Council. All Professor Thomashausen is doing is trying to diminish the importance of this case at the ICJ and suggesting an alternative that he knows cannot work because the United States will not allow it to work. I think that really disingenuous.
Professor Thomashausen, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I'm glad that that Jeenah knows so much about what the United States might veto and what they might not veto. A peacekeeping force in Gaza would be now, after the progression over 7 months, the only way to stop the two warring parties from continuing with their attempts at inflicting harm on each other. Even today, Hamas fired a barrage of missiles against civilian targets in Israel. So the military aggression is continuing, and that gives Israel the right to defend itself. And this will carry on unless somebody steps in. If in a bad situation, in a school break, you have two groups of boys that are throwing stones at each other, obviously the teacher must step in between and he must separate them. And that is what now has to be done. I don't see any other way to end the terrible situation. Of course, the situation is heart-wrenching as we watch it every day from our screens. The other issue is, of course, that the ICJ is in a big predicament. All they hear is hearsay evidence. Nobody before them can rightly present direct evidence. There's our professor from Ballito, which is the Côte d'Azur of South Africa. There's our other attorney from Her Elegant Chambers in Sandton, and so on. They're just reporting what they have selectively taken off the media.
Professor Thomashausen, can I just intervene quickly? The reason that this can't happen, what you are saying, that they cannot present evidence, we heard through South Africa's submissions that Israel won't allow aid, won't allow journalists, and to an extent, they are even now accused of trying to destroy evidence. So how are they going to present evidence before the ICJ?
Well, there is no objective fact-finding. You know, there's media reports that say, yes, you cannot go and take pictures, and there's other media evidence that says that the Hamas Ministry of Health has just corrected their figures, that they're not over 30,000 dead, but only 20,000, and of those, there are 4,600 natural deaths.
You're lying now, you're lying.
No, you can.
You're lying.
No.
The Hamas figures were downgraded. The figure now is 34,000, not 20,000. Come on.
20,000.
Have a good discussion. Have a debate.
It's all over there. The report from the Ministry of Health is there.
It's all over the internet. Exactly. It's all over the internet, and you're lying about it.
All right.
No,
Mr. Jeenah?
Please don't accuse me of lying. I'm not accusing you of lying. So let us.
I'm accusing you of lying because you are.
All right,
well,
gentlemen. Mr. Jeenah, let's do this. Let's allow Professor Thomashausen to finish his point, and then you'll come in. Please conclude your submissions.
Very, very briefly, we know that there's a lot of controversy about fact. All sorts of people put things forward and say it's a fact, but we don't have independent audits. We do not have a fact-finding capacity in the ICJ. And the ICJ can listen to both sides, and maybe then they must decide on conducting their own evidence collection. But that they will only do in the main proceedings before they make a judgment, and that will take time, and that's why it will take time. And that's why I maintain it is not going to save lives. Only a lobbying of the Security Council could approve measures that will actually save lives. And the United States have changed their stance. They have stopped supplying certain lethal ammunitions. And the European Union has also started cutting back on support for Israel. Basically, the entire world is now of the opinion this conflict must end. It's gone on long enough. And then we need a different engagement.
Mr. Jeenah, I'm going to allow you just as adequate time, but I need to take a break first. So let's do that, and we continue the conversation in a moment. If you're just joining us, we are in the middle of a conversation about South Africa's latest submissions to the International Court of Justice. And joining me for this conversation is Mapungubwe Institute's senior researcher, Jeenah, and alongside him is the University of South Africa's Professor Thomashausen. Let's come to you, Mr. Jeenah, and you want to respond to some of what Professor Thomashausen has had to say, and he does suggest a peacekeeping force. Would that be a solution?
Force would be a solution to protect Palestinians, a force that will protect Palestinians against a genocide that's taking place. But Mr. Thomashausen doesn't even admit that there is such a thing. In his comments earlier, all he spoke about was Hamas rockets, not the fact that 35,000, and by the way, let me just make this clear, the Gaza Ministry of Health changed the figures downwards of women and children killed. The total figure was reduced by about 500. The total figure is still more than 34,000, right? So, so yes, if we had such a thing, but a peacekeeping force can only be established by the UN Security Council. And the United States has proven itself. This is not out of my head. The US has proven that it will do everything at the Security Council to defend and protect Israel. Yesterday, so he says that they've decided not to supply certain lethal weapons. Yesterday, they approved another $1 billion in military aid to Israel. Secondly, that I find it really disgusting, the way in which he, and this is not the first time, this is from January that he's been doing this, maligning the legal team, the South African legal team that's at The Hague. At least two of those people are professors of international law. One of them was defending South African activists, human rights activists, while Mr. Thomashausen was allegedly an agent of the German government. So to malign them in that kind of way, I think is really problematic. Thirdly, that what we require, he's correct. What we require is an independent investigation into everything that has happened. But Israel will not allow, and this is not new, they never do allow any independent investigation to take place. They will destroy the evidence instead. And so that call, that, the resistance in Gaza has accepted that there needs to be an independent investigation. It's Israel that refuses to accept that. Yeah. Last week, the resistance in Gaza accepted a ceasefire proposal that was drawn up by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. It's Israel that refuses. It's Israel that wants to continue the genocide, not the war, the genocide that's taking place. It's Israel that wants to go into Rafah and massacre people there. 1.5 million people in a town that's supposed to hold only 300,000. It's not the resistance. It's Israel, right? And it's Israel that refuses. So if this thing goes, the reason he's putting forward the position he is not because he wants to save Palestinian lives. It's because he wants to defer this from the International Court of Justice so that the court doesn't make a ruling against Israel, defer it rather to a political forum. This is a judicial matter, but he wants to defer it to a political forum, the UN Security Council, where he knows the United States will veto it and nothing will come of it. This is the kind of disingenuousness that I'm talking about.
Okay.
It's a way of deferring things in order to protect Israel and its genocide.
Professor Thomashausen, do you agree that Rafah is the last hope for Palestinians not only to exist on this earth, but to rebuild what essentially is said to be rubble? That place has been reduced to rubble by the Israeli military. If you do agree that Rafah is the last hope, if Israel does enter it, will that not amount to an annihilation of the people of Palestine?
Look, we're talking about things that we haven't seen with our own eyes. We have conflicting information before us. I know, of course, that the submission of South Africa today was that the very right of existence of the Palestinian population in Gaza is currently at risk, meaning the entire people that live in Gaza. Now, that is a very tough, tall order to prove, to substantiate, and this is why the court has called for these hearings today and tomorrow, because even if we now accept the very controversial and debated figures, let us say there are 35,000 that have perished. Let us say half of those were combatants that do not enjoy the same protection as civilians. Then we're dealing with a very, very small percentage of a Palestinian population or people of 7 million.
Professor Thomashausen, are you still there? Okay, I think he is frozen. Mr. Jeenah, let's come to you. The same question, essentially. If Israel does enter Rafah, could this be the end? All right, I see that Professor Thomashausen is back. Professor Thomashausen, we lost you for a moment. Please, could you unmute and finish your thought process?
Sorry, I'm not muted.
Okay, yeah, but we did lose you for a moment. Just conclude.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
It's technical. Okay, in conclusion, what South Africa is trying to establish and prove before the court, I think it will fail this time just as it failed in January and in March, simply because there is a difference between breaches of humanitarian law, possibly even war crimes, and genocide. And this is where the whole judicial activism is problematic. Because to pin it on genocide so far hasn't succeeded, and in my opinion, hasn't done any good. It has not helped. It has actually fueled, it has inflamed this conflict.
Okay. Mr. Jeenah, you have about a minute, sir. Why can't Israel stop the military action in Rafah?
Israel doesn't want. Israel wants a genocide. Israel wants to get rid of the Palestinian people. Israel wants to get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, this is its objective. Its stated objective. It has not come even close to meeting that. You know, two stated objectives. One is to destroy Hamas, which is an impossible task. Secondly, to free the captives, which it has not done, right? Yet it continues, yet it has murdered 35,000 people, and you can't make the assumption that half of them are combatants. There's no evidence for that. A few hundred, perhaps, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 at most. The rest are civilians. So Israel is intent on a genocide. This is, you look at the rhetoric that has been provided to the court by South Africa, of ministers, of the prime minister, of military leaders, etc. And to end, let me just say this. South Africa did not fail at the ICJ in January. In fact, the ICJ ruled against every single argument that Israel made and accepted every argument that South Africa made with a slight modification. That is that it didn't order directly Israel to stop stop its genocidal attacks.
All right.
But the conditions that it asked for implied that. So right. South Africa actually got what it wanted in January.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we are completely out of time. Let me thank you very much for your time.